I'm Father Sam Kachuba. Welcome to The Tangent.
You threw a new piece.
Yeah, I did.
We have a little competition to see who can get the first word in friend. And I think Father Sam just tied the score.
I might have pulled ahead with that one. I'm not sure, but
Yeah.
Well,
yeah, we're not even.
Guys, I'm married, so I'm accustomed to not getting the first word in. So,
well,
Yeah.
today very excited to have Francis Maier with us to talk about True Confessions, Voices of Faith from a Life in the Church. Fran, this new book from Ignatius Press, we told you when you got on, we've both been reading it, and it's just so exciting. It's just so exciting to read this book. So could you give us a little bit of where this book comes from, the inspiration behind it, and how you got it all started?
sure. Well, I've worked for the church in one capacity or another for nearly 5 decades now. I almost said 5 centuries, but that would be a bit of a, feels like it some days. But I was editor of the National Catholic Register for 15 years, and then worked in diocesan service for, I guess, a total of 27 or something. And now I'm a senior fellow in Catholic studies. So, I mean, I've been around the church or in the church working for a long time. And I just wanted to leave a record for people that'll come after me in terms of what that experience was like, so that they can discard what they don't need and that they can take what they do. My experience has been overwhelmingly positive in terms of the people that I've worked with, the priests that I've known, the bishops. I've known quite a few bishops. They're very good men. And I think that has to be taken into account when you're balancing the problems in the church against the possibilities. It's very easy to become depressed now because of so much is going on in the culture. And so little positive news is reported in the mass media that it's just easy to lose hope, and there's no reason to do that, So that's the main reason I wanted to write it. To leave a record for people.
Now, how many people did you have to interview for this?
103.
Book? 103.
Yeah,
okay.
it kind of expanded as I went along. The 30 bishops, and then a bunch of priests and deacons and consecrated people, and of course, primarily lay people, because the book is primarily focused on lay ministry and lay people.
Where did you expect these interviews to go? Like, were you expecting to increase the audience that you were, or maybe not the audience, but the type of people that you were interviewing, or did that just sort of happen organically?
No, it just happened organically, Father. I think if you look at the structure of the book, I mean, I wanted to know what bishops think, not what their communications people want them to think or say they think, but what they actually think. And then that's one perspective. The other perspective is people in the field doing the work. I mean, people like yourself, Father, and deacons and consecrated people. And then the next category is lay people. And of course, then that led into what makes a diocese work and what doesn't. Why do donors give money? What are the marks of a successful lay ministry? And so one thing led to another. It originally started as Fran Maier's grand strategy of the Catholic Church in the 21st century, but that's other people. Pardon me one second. Other people have done that really well, and I publish my thoughts a lot, and so it became kind of incumbent on me to get what other people think into print. To find out what they actually think, not what I think they think or what other people want them to think, but what they actually think. And when you ask people honestly, they tell you. And it's a very interesting portrait, I think, of actual Catholic life in the United States at this particular point in history.
So what were some of the questions you asked some of the bishops?
I had a list of about 25 questions that are fairly standard. I mean, what's the future of celibacy, for example? What do you think about the structure of the church in the future? Stuff that's fairly predictable, but all that stuff went out the window within 5 or 10 minutes because people want to talk about what's important to them. And then in addition, I didn't want to replicate the same opinions in every condensation and editing that I did. So
Right.
I kind of separated out the particular personality of the bishops, for example, and used the material that was important to them. The interviews, I think the shortest interview I did was about 7,000 words transcribed. The longest was about 11,000. That's a lot of
Wow.
words.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so the task of editing and condensing those views into an understandable and readable interview was tedious. But I think it represents what they actually thought.
I was interested in this because getting the description of the book, I wasn't entirely certain what to expect, other than I've read Fran Maier's articles before, so I kind of had a sense of your voice as a writer, but I really didn't have any expectations for what these voices would be if you're doing these interviews. I think if anything, there was maybe a little bit of fear that I would have that these could be some pretty wild and crazy ideas getting thrown around there, and maybe that's going to prove that I'm not listening enough. But I have found myself as I read through these interviews and I read through the things that people are saying, both the things that bishops say, the things that priests say, deacons, and lay people. I've been actually blown away by, as I'm reading along, just kind of nodding and saying, I could have written this myself. I could have said this. This is exactly the way that I would have answered this question. And I think that came, I don't know, maybe as kind of a surprise. And
I think it's the title, Father. I mean, that, when you hear True Confessions, it sounds like some sort of scandal sheet. But but the fact is that well, first of all, True Confessions, the movie, is one of my all-time favorite movies, and I think it's a profoundly Catholic movie if you watch it all the way to the end. So that was part of it. That was the original inspiration. But then, obviously, we're all confessors. I mean, that's our job. I mean, confess Jesus Christ. And so the people that I interviewed were people who were serious about confessing the faith in a honest and complete way. And nobody that I interviewed didn't fit in that category. I mean, I deliberately avoided voices on the church left and on the church right that just don't like the way things are and want to change the teaching or are bitterly angry toward the Pope. And I didn't want that. I wanted people who were serious Catholics who were confessing Jesus Christ and confessing their Catholic faith in an honest way.
well, I think that really comes through. You don't have the sense of a fringe voice being given a platform or anything. Rather, everything just sounds very honest, normal, balanced, healthy. Like these are good perspectives. But to hear how very real they are, and then I like how you kind of list somebody. So a theology professor, mother, and active catechist in the parish, something like that. You give these descriptors of the person who's answering, so you have the sense of where they might be coming from. As you list the pastors, pastor of a suburban parish, pastor of an urban parish, or pastor of an urban and rural diocese, which I thought was interesting because there's only so many places in the country that can be described as urban and rural. Where we're pretty much a suburban diocese almost entirely, with a couple of little urban areas, but like there's just such. I was really fascinated by those, as with this variety of backgrounds that you're getting such consistent. Such a consistent sense of where the church is and kind of what the needs of the church are.
Well, I'm glad that came through, Father. Yeah, the readers should be. There are a couple of things that I would hope that readers understood. Number one, you can pick the book up and read the chapters out of sequence. Aside from the Archbishop's introduction, my preface, and then I wrote the first and the last chapter. And you really should read the book from cover to cover. That was the intention. But if you have a particular interest, for example, in what makes a diocese run, or my favorite chapter in the entire book is the interviews with the parents of special needs kids, which were very, very powerful. I mean, they're really something else, I think. I mean, you can pick that up and read that separately. But I wanted to, there are two chapters that I deliberately made anonymous, the interviews. One of them was with bishops, and that was at my request because I wanted the bishops to feel completely safe about what they said, and you're not going to get that when bishops are routinely misrepresented or misunderstood in their public statements.
Sure.
So I eliminated that possibility and enabled them to be comfortable and free in what they said. The other one was the chapter that I have on, I guess it's called Here Comes Everybody, which is interviews primarily with educators. And there were a number of the guys and women in that chapter that were uneasy about being identified because they could be canceled. They could lose their jobs, or they could be, really internet mobbed. And so I made that chapter anonymous as well for their benefit. Everybody else is named, and everybody else had an opportunity to review their material and approve it. So, and in the case of mother and wife and university professor, I wanted both with the men and the women to identify what I thought were their primary vocations. Father first, husband second, or I guess husband first, father second, and then whatever he did. Same with women, because I think it's important to remember that our primary responsibility is to the people that we're intimately connected with. I mean, I have my primary responsibility is to be a good husband, and then a good father, and then to bring home the resources through my work. Work is important, but it's third on the list.
Yeah.
As I was reading through, I was kind of struck by, I guess, the last big report that was published that got a lot of time and airtime was sort of the synod report, the synod redaction or summary, I guess you could call it. Of course, a larger scale survey of people. 103 people versus diocesan surveys of a lot of people. But I read the synod report that the USCCB published and felt absolutely no connection to it. I didn't feel in any way represented. I didn't feel that these were things that these weren't thoughts that I've ever thought before. And here it is being put out there as though this is what's on the mind of the American church. And I was thinking to myself, my experience is totally different than that. And even, at a diocesan level, some of the synod reports that you'd see, I don't know anybody who really is thinking that way. And I mean, I guess I just prefer your book to the synod report, if I'm really honest. But I'm kind of wondering here, the True Confessions, do you think that you were able to draw something out that the synod questioners were not able to bring out of people?
No, very easily so. I mean, I think that's true. I saw the synod report and I thought it was totally inadequate, and I wrote about it actually. I mean, I think the number of people who actually took part in it was very inappropriately low. It was skewed in a direction of issues that just simply aren't on the plate for most of the people that I know in my life who are active in the church. And the other thing too, Father, is that what I wanted to do in the book was to have extended, in-depth conversations with people so they could actually tell me what they thought and put it in the context of their lives. You can't do that in a survey.
Yeah.
Surveys do have a good purpose. I mean, I think the survey of American priests, for example, that I reference in the book, was exceptionally well done. Steve White, who's one of my colleagues at the Ethics and Public Policy Center, did it, and I think the data that were collected are very, very useful. But that was a very well run survey of American priests, and the system, the synod the system that was applied during the synod was all over the lot in terms of the kinds of competencies that were brought to it. Some dioceses did it really well. Denver did it very well, actually, but a lot of them just didn't, and the participation was low, and so the results are complicated and not very useful.
Yeah.
What set apart those dioceses that did it well?
The bishop who took it seriously and was faithful to what the church teaches. Archbishop Sam Aquila in Denver is a family friend. I mean, we've known the Archbishop for 30 years, actually when he had hair back 30 years ago. And he just took it very seriously and was very engaged and kept it on the right track in terms of the way it was executed. So its results are pretty good, actually. And it can be done in other places too, but overall, it wasn't.
Yeah. I've been reading some of these answers about just how people are feeling towards the church. And you've got one in here from a wife, mother, policy expert, and author. And she just says, as much as some of our Catholic leaders talk about the importance of inclusion, that's not going to solve our problems. It's because they don't see anything in her, the church, that compels their interest. The culture has deadened their souls. I mean, that just resonated so much that people are, it's never about really exclusion. It's more they just don't care. I think indifference is our far greater challenge right now. Were you finding that as a regular answer?
Yeah, there's a lot of anxiety about that.
Yeah.
The inclusion really, you don't include people who don't believe what you believe. I mean, that's not unjust. That's just sanity. I mean, why would you include people who are fundamentally against what the principles of the community are, not just in the church or anywhere else?
Right.
I mean, obviously people who are struggling with sexual or other issues that want some sort of healing. Of course, the church has a place for those people, and a lot of compassion. But if the issue is the church is wrong about its sexuality, and the church is wrong about what defines a human being, but I'd still like to be part of the deal, I mean, that can't possibly work without disrupting the rights of everybody else who's a true believer, I mean, so that's one issue. I mean, the other thing too is that people give their lives to things that really matter to them. And you make the point about indifference. And we produced a consumer culture that makes it almost impossible to imagine that anyone would have an unpleasant afterlife, if you even believe in an afterlife. And yet that's what the church is basically preaching, is that our life is beyond this world and we have an eternal destiny. And so what you do actually matters enormously. So if that becomes obscured, then, well, why do you need the church? A lot of places can provide you with a good ethical code of behavior. If that's what you're really looking for, you don't need the church for that. You need the church if you want to get to heaven. And I happen to want to get to heaven. So
Right. Yeah, if we can get back to that basic fundamental truth that the church is here not because of this worldly aspect. We're not here as an NGO. We're not here just to provide social services. We're here to help souls on the way to heaven. If we're going to help them on the way to heaven, then we're going to have to help with certain material things here and now. But that's not the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal is heaven. And so, yeah, there's a spiritual reality. There is such a thing as sin, and there is such a thing as forgiveness. And we want everybody to understand that and to receive those graces. But yeah.
But Father, even beyond that, so in it's the fifth interview with one of the bishops from an urban diocese. To quote it, it says that the bishop says the disappearance of natural law thinking has made a huge effect on the diminishment of religion, but also on people's ability to intuit that some things are always right, other things are always wrong, and how to properly apply prudential reasoning to things in the middle, right? And so that, I was encouraged because to hear, honestly, the presupposition that I probably should make clear is I think there's a great distrust of the bishops throughout the country. I think that people have this inherent distrust of authority. Admittedly, I'm only 26, so I'm on the receiving end of this distrust in terms of a historical, I don't know about regression, but progression rather of that kind of idea. And so reading this, I was like, oh man, there are bishops that are teaching it. They're teaching it, and they are recognizing the same problems that I mean, maybe on a local scale I have recognized, right? Because I'm not nearly in the position they're in. I teach CCD. I don't pastor a diocese, so I have 12 seventh graders in my classroom. My bishop has several 100,000 Catholics on his plate. But I was just so encouraged to see things like that, where it was here's the problem. I've recognized the problem, and to an extent, I guess I took from that, and I'm working on it. But just the fact that there were bishops who could recognize this particular issue about the natural law, because Father, you were talking about the faith, but I think it's deeper than that. And this bishop does too. I realize there's no question here. I just wanted to comment on what Father was saying.
But I think that's a good observation. People people do have a distrust of their bishops, and it's inculcated by the broader culture, but
Right.
it isn't warranted. I mean, look,
Yes.
bishops are people like everybody else. They have their flaws, they have their weak spots. Some occasionally are bad guys. Okay, they just don't do the job, or they're too ambitious, or who knows what.
Right.
But most of the men, I had very few experiences of that in my years in service. I mean, I just think most of the guys are good guys who are trying to do their best according to their skill sets.
Right.
And believe me, it's not a fun job. Anybody who thinks it's going to be, a cakewalk is really needs psychiatric help, because it's 20. If you do the job, and Father, you would know this. I mean, if you've had any kind of pastoral service, I mean, if you do the job, it's 24/7 all the time. And lay people are frequently a pain in the neck, because we all are. We're really good at complaining, and
Yeah.
not quite so good in thanking people, and
Hmm.
and respecting people, particularly in a culture that runs on conflict now all the time. So there was a time, in the book, I reference this in the film and in the book, True Confessions. There was a time in the 40s when being a Catholic bishop in the United States was really a big deal. You had cultural and political influence because you had this kind of Catholic vote behind you that could deliver or take away public office. That's all gone. It's all back to apostolic action now,
Hmm.
and that's really hard and very draining if you do the job properly.
Do you think I I hear that, right? And I say to myself, the Lord is obviously allowing it, but I see a plan there to depoliticize the church, basically. Like, because the church was never about politics at its core. The
Right.
church is about Christ, like you said. Honest Catholics who are trying to live the faith as best as they can, always. It's not the far right, it's not the far left, it's Christ.
Hmm.
And so I see that lack of a Catholic vote, which I actually think, and this is obviously not a dig on the organization Catholic Vote, but I think it's funny that during elections, like, people talk about Catholic Vote on different news outlets, and I've heard that, and I've been like, what are you talking about? You know what I mean? What do
Yeah.
you mean the Catholic Vote? Like there are. Do you know how many Catholics I've personally met who don't agree with the church on the position of abortion? Like a really fundamental thing,
Or how many
And it's
Catholics have
like,
just decided that their vote doesn't count anyway, so they don't bother.
right, and so but the fact that it's back to that apostolic mission, I'm like, yes, this is what it was supposed to be. It's funny, it pumps me up. I'm like, this is what we were supposed to be doing in the first place, go out and make disciples, not go out and join a political party. But again, no question. You're just feeding me all this information. I
Well,
usually have
I mean, look,
questions, Fran.
politics is part of the mission. I mean, we have to be publicly engaged because we're supposed to be living in society. So you can't
Right.
just say, "Well, I'm going to, pull a ripcord and I'm out of here." I mean, you have to be
Sure.
engaged. But your point about it being a secondary element of the larger missionary mandate is a really important one. And I mean, Catholic Vote, the organization, actually does some really good work. So
I
I'm
agree with you. That's why I
But
somewhat
but
tongue in
but
cheek
no,
said it
but
wasn't a
your
critique.
fundamental point is a correct one. Christianity is not about politics. It's not about power in a worldly sense. It's about the next world and getting there and making people the kind of people who can live and create a humane society. And that isn't fundamentally a political education. It's a moral education based on a
Hmm.
relationship with Jesus Christ. So I don't know. I mean, I think what's happened. First of all, I think that this is a really good time to be a Christian, precisely because it's a hard time. I
Hmm.
mean, it certainly has a winnowing effect, and that's not a bad thing. If you look at history, and one of my favorite books of Christian history is Hubert. I think his last name is Jadin or Yaden. I forget. He was a German Catholic bishop, a Catholic priest, famous church historian, and he did a history of the Council of Trent, multi-volume. First volume is the 125 years leading up to the Reformation. And it's just one car crash after another. I mean, for 125 years, one gigantic mess after another. And yet here we are, talking about the church today, 500 years later. The way it works is that the church gains influence, succeeds, then goes into a trough, has catastrophes and problems. That produces saints. The saints that begin the renewal, and the wave starts again. If you want a really hair-raising period in the church, just go back to the Arian heresy, or go back to the 10th and 11th centuries. I mean, where you had just wicked popes, not bad popes, really bad guys, and that's just part of the human clay, and yet if you fixate only on that, then you do lose hope, and there's no reason to do that, because the process is always a production of new saints. My generation made a contribution; it also screwed things up, but then there are people like you, Matt. I mean, there are a lot of people like
don't build me up too high.
No, but I mean, there are a lot of people who want something more than a lot more stuff faster, because there's no satisfaction in that. There's no purpose to it.
Yeah. The one of the other things that you mention in the book is the assimilation of Catholics into American culture.
Yeah.
And that was something that admittedly I hadn't thought very much about before. Again, I think just because I grew up in that culture where I also went to Catholic school my whole life, so I didn't have too many Protestant friends, and I'm from an Italian family, and we're all Catholics, and we're all practicing Catholics, and some kids hung out with their friends on the weekend, and I went and hung out with my cousins, and that's how it went, and so I was surrounded by Catholicism almost exclusively for, I don't know, at least for the first 14 years of my life. And so that idea of Catholics having to become a part of American culture is something I have never personally experienced, at least on the front end. And so I was just so, I don't know, it so piqued my interest that the idea of Catholics becoming more accepted in American culture had its pros, but now it has its cons. And now, and you were just talking about the 11th century. And I wonder if that was a problem then, right? That it was such a, quote, Catholic culture that Catholicism at its core got lost, and it became more of like a cultural Catholicism as would be negatively thought of today. Is that accurate?
I think that's a good perspective. Yeah, I think there's certainly a lot of truth to that. I think in the American environment, which is unusual, because what's the core experience of the United States? It's a biblical morality and an Enlightenment intellectual framework, right?
Right. Yeah.
It's a mixed marriage that doesn't work unless they both are vigorous, And the more the biblical morality falls away, the weirder the country gets, which is what we're living through now. Now, where do Catholics fit into that? Because we're aliens here, or we were. 120 years ago, we were still a mission church. We weren't a church in the nation until, what was it, Father? I think 1908, when we were no longer regarded as a mission church,
Yeah.
But in 1908, you still had decades of Catholics having to prove themselves as, hey, we're good Americans too, Stanley Hauerwas, the Methodist theologian, joked in one of his articles a few years ago, maybe it was more than a decade ago, that the reason you found so many Catholics in the CIA and the FBI and the Marines was because we had to prove ourselves, hey, we're really good, faithful Americans too. Well, we did really well. If you look at us, at the nominal Catholic population and their economic and professional accomplishments, there's nobody like us. I mean, we've done an incredible job, but in the process, we've forgotten who we are. I mean, the culture has bleached our distinctive religious nature out of us in the process of us becoming part of the culture, and that's really dangerous, and something that we need to educate people to be a little bit more critical of the culture that they're in, to separate themselves more, and to understand patriotism in a healthier way. I mean, patriotism is a Christian virtue, properly understood. But it's a love of the best ideals, the best virtues of a culture. It's not an automatic, America's great. I mean, we have to be more critical about things like that, because we're not part of this. I mean, what's the quote? from Scripture, Father, about no lasting city. This is no lasting
Yeah,
city
we have
for
no
us.
lasting
No.
city, right? And
Yeah.
that's an interesting point because I think the way that Americans have assimilated into the culture, uh, what once was sort of leaven in the society, and that was kind of how Catholics, I think, even saw themselves as sort of a group, part of the culture, but different. But so much so as the assimilation happened that they eventually just became of the culture. So rather than
Yeah.
being leavened, the culture kind of washed over us. I remember a professor of mine saying that the worst thing that happened to the church in the United States was JFK getting elected, because
Yeah.
once that happened, we were mainstream. Once Catholics had achieved the highest office in the land, we were just like everybody else, and
Right.
I thought that was a really interesting point. And then at the same time, to realize, like, if we had some sense of evangelical zeal also along with that, not just that we're going to try to make it as members of this society, as citizens of this country, we're going to try to make it, but we're also, as citizens of heaven, as members of the body of Christ on earth, we're going to try to bring the light of Christ into our country. I think it was more like, see, Catholics belong here too, instead of Catholics belong here too, and you belong with us as Catholics. Like, you belong with us in embracing the faith. I wonder sometimes if that could have done it. If I can go back to the bishop question, uh, I was really grateful, Fran, for the way that you wrote about the bishops and the things that they shared, because it gave such a good insight, I think, into them, and absolutely confirmed you're 100% correct. Anybody who wants that job absolutely needs to be committed, evaluated, medicated. I don't know. That's wild, just wild. To see the things that those men go through is really amazing. And so to read their stories, I was actually I was really encouraged by them, by those stories, and I was grateful for it. But in the back of my mind was this study that you alluded to before from Catholic U about priests and their bishops. And I wondered, did that study come up at all in the context of those interviews? And what did you find? Are the bishops concerned about that relationship and that bond that they have with their priests?
Yeah, there are two. Well, there are two studies that I reference in the book, Father. One of them is from the Center for Applied Research in the Apostolate from 2016 that became a book in 2019, and it was a study of bishops and their attitudes. I mean, their work habits. I mean, everything from how much sleep do you get at night to what do you think of your priests. And of course, the bishops as a group have a very positive attitude toward their priests. Now, if we compare that with the other survey that I mentioned, I don't go into a lot of detail, but I quote some of the results. That was done in, I think, 2022 or 23 out of Catholic University of America. I've mentioned it just previously. It was done by Steve White, who's one of the scholars that a colleague of mine at the Ethics and Public Policy Center. The perception of priests toward their bishops is very different from the other way around. And the reason for that is that, well, there's a kind of a built-in reason for it in the sense that the bishop is, a brother and a father to his priest, but he's also the boss.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just hardwired into the relationship. The other thing, though, is that the abuse crisis really wounded a lot of innocent priests in the sense that, well, wait a minute, all they need is to say one false allegation about me and I'm over the side. And that worry is a considerable worry from a lot of priests who are faithful guys. I
Yeah.
mean, guys that are really completely on board and faithful with the church. They have that anxiety. So there's a difference of attitude in the relationship.
Yeah. Is that something you think the bishops are alert to? Do they realize
Oh
that
yeah.
that tension is there? And did you get a
Oh
sense
yeah.
from any of them about, like, how they want to address that? How can they fix that?
No, they didn't deal with it specifically. Their attitude, and you see it again and again in what they say, is just very positive toward their
Mm.
guys. The message they're sending out and that they want priests to read is that they really value and respect
Mm.
them. So I don't know how long, I don't know how that's going to heal or how long it will take to heal, but it's an ongoing problem.
Yeah. If I could then ask you to speculate a little bit on a problem that I'm working through myself and trying to figure it out, and I don't know if I've got all the stuff in a row just yet, but one of the women who you interviewed, I think very astutely makes the distinction talking about clericalism, that it's not so much about priests lording it over people. That's a form of clericalism that we obviously have to reject. But sometimes it's about lay people trying to become clergy. But sometimes it's also about clergy doing things that really belong more properly to the sphere of the laity. So you have sometimes people who are just seeking office in the church, or they want a job in the church for the sake of getting some kind of power. And this woman, I can't remember exactly her words, but it was something like, whatever little bit of power you think you might get, it's not going to happen. It's not going to make any difference, and it's not going to make you happy, and it's not going to make you holy. So drop it. And I thought that was a great line. But she does talk about then that there are certain things that priests, pastors in particular, are kind of expected to do. So here's this role that you should be playing now, but that pastor has no training, has no preparation for it, has no context in which he can possibly exercise that role. And actually, as you're kind of giving the history here of the church in the United States, I think it's interesting because I think we can see a little bit of how this all develops. So if you go back to that time when to be a bishop in the United States meant to have a whole group of people, a whole population that you could kind of say, this is what we're doing, and everybody would get on board. Well, that Catholic culture also lent itself at the parish level to, we need this painted, we need this thing taken care of, we need to do this. And people could come, the church was going to be taken care of. Even a poorer church, things would be dealt with, and the entirety of the parish staff was the pastor, whatever priests were assigned to the parish. Maybe there was a parish secretary and housekeeper and cook, and she was all one person and she ran everything. And then you had sister who ran the school, and whatever sisters were teaching in the school, and the school kind of could function separately. And the pastor could go out and say, we're taking a collection this week we need to get a new boiler, and people would come over and hand him cash, and he would put it in his pocket and go out and buy a boiler, and nobody batted an eye. And you think about how parish staffs and diocesan staffs now have grown so much, and there's so many more people, and we have financial policies and procedures in place. We have insurance policies that we have to worry about. We've got to worry about keeping in line with all these different things. The culture around us has changed so much. The insurance culture has changed so much. The fears of litigation and all these other things have changed so much that now to try to manage as a pastor, you don't have a housekeeper. You're lucky if you have a housekeeper, much less a staff that can take care of all these things. And so the job of pastor has now included basically at least MBA level administrative skills that none of us have, because unless we got an MBA before seminary, right? Because we're not trained in that. And this is a long way to get to the question, but what I kind of wrestle with is that when we look at the three munera of the priesthood, priest, prophet, and king, and that governing office, to the kingly office, that the pastor, sharing in the priesthood of Christ, has a role to administer the temporal goods of the church and to take care of the earthly things that are necessary. At what point do we cross the line in being overly administrative? And at what point do we also abdicate that responsibility? Like, does a priest, by delegating authority to take care of certain things, just abdicate too much? And then how do we kind of make that work in the current context of things that are outside of our control, like insurance policies and labor laws and things like that?
Yeah, well, that's a first of all, I don't have an answer.
Okay.
I don't have an answer for very good reasons, that the circumstances shift so dramatically from parish to parish. But you did not become a priest, I would wager, in order to be a CEO of $1 million operation. I mean, that's not why guys get into it, and yet that's what they end up frequently doing. And so let me break down the issues that you've raised, because you've raised a number of them. First of all, the perception that clericalism is primarily a priestly problem is straight out of the 1940s. It's not really applicable anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, people got used to saying, Father will take care of it, okay? And what part of that was because Father did take care of it, okay? But the other thing is that it's great when you can just blame everything on the guy up top, I mean, and that's a classic human behavior, not my fault, it's his fault. And And so clericalism, as I've experienced in my life, is as much a problem that I have as the pastors that I've worked around and with. My assumption is that Father's the boss, and of course, on one level, he is the boss. He's the father of the parish. But it's easy to blame Dad for everything. And that's what we're really good at when we don't want to take responsibility for our own ministry. Now, you also, the issue of acquiring power in the church. That word power is the most inappropriate word I can think of in terms of, authority, properly exercised authority.
Right.
I mean, I'm the father of a family, and if my wife walked in momentarily and you asked her, who's the head of the family? She would say, well, Fran is, obviously. What that means is I get to do what she wants. That's, my job is service, and a priest's job is to serve his people. Part of that service is actually being the authority in the church. So you're not going to be a better layperson if you become a lector. Lecturing's great. I think Father Joe Fessio, who's a good friend, makes that in his long-form interview. Look, if you want to be a lector, terrific, but being a lector is not going to make you a better layperson. Right. Being a layperson is getting out into the workplace and witnessing Jesus Christ. That's what your vocation is. Your vocation is forming people to do that. All right. So the other thing that, if I can break down some of the really good points that you made, that we're a legal culture,
Mm-hmm.
and there was a time when a kind of mutually shared biblical morality kept that legalism to a manageable minimum. But now, basically, everything is litigation. And what that means is that the civil law side, and criminal law side of church life has just exploded like a cancer. So I mean, you have these huge bureaucracies that, in one sense, are necessary, eating up a lot of resources that could be better spent in the mission field. And I don't know what to do about that, Father, other than the fact that we're not going to have those resources in the future, and we're going to have to adapt and recover what our original mission was. Can priests do a better job of administering? Well, I think a number of Catholic organizations exist in order to help priests lead better, and they do a really good job. In terms of the quality of the priests that are coming out, I mean, I think I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but I mean, one of the big positives of the last 30 years in this country has been the tremendous increase in the quality of our seminaries. I mean, that's a clear win. They're clearly better than they were 30, 40 years ago.
Sure.
And so the guys coming out are, I think, in a lot of ways more realistic about the kinds of challenges that they're going to face. They tend to be sometimes conservative in a negative sense, wanting some of the nostalgic frills of the priesthood. But I think in general they have a really good missionary sense of the culture that they're getting into, and they understand it's going to be hard. So,
yeah. Do you think that on the other side, the guys are coming out of the seminary and they're strong, they're good men. I've been so impressed meeting seminarians the last several years, just the quality of these guys and the way that their formation has happened. I think their formation has been really good. I wonder sometimes back home in their diocese, do the people who are going to receive them, do the priests who they're going to go and join, realize the quality of these men? Do they understand what has changed in seminary formation, so that some of the things that people are afraid of, they've kind of got a boogeyman idea of what's coming towards them from the seminary, not realizing actually that the seminary is sending them very, very good men who will be good shepherds and who will care for them. They've been told maybe that there's this boogeyman out there of some guy who's going to show up and who's going to destroy everything. And unfortunately, that's because of lived experience in some cases that, boogeyman did show up and destroy everything in their parish.
Well, I've known guys that came out of seminary and were too rigid.
Sure.
I mean, you can't allow that to happen. And it does happen sometimes. That's just human nature. But I think a lot of the bishops that I interviewed had a very healthy sense of placing new guys with an experienced pastor who knows how to do it the right way, and that they can learn from and kind of, get the rough edges out of their service. That's a real weakness, by the way, and a number of bishops talked about that. One of the things that's lacking, I think Archbishop Shappy said this at one point, that if he had it to do over, what he would focus on is helping young priests after they're ordained in those first 3 years of ministry, which can be really, really tough if you're not with a pastor that can understand your circumstances and form you in a proper way, kind of ease you into the work,
Yeah.
That's a real need.
I
don't know if
I think this new stage that they've added to the Ratio Fundamentalis for priestly formation can be a really interesting one. They've got this vocational synthesis piece. And I've talked to some guys in seminary formation work, and everybody seems a little confused as to exactly what they're supposed to do with that. But I think to that point, those first few years of ordination are really important. So we would want to have young priests, newly ordained priests, working with priests who can really help them to grow. Part of the challenge there is you've got to have good priests who are formed and prepared to properly assist those newly ordained. Like, there's a difference between being a seminary formator and being responsible for guys who are still in formation, and being the pastor of a newly ordained priest who is no longer in seminary formation. You can't treat a newly ordained priest like a seminarian. At the same time, you can't just treat him like he knows everything, because he doesn't. He's experiencing it for the first time. So I think to have some pastors who are well trained and prepared, and who also have the sort of natural gift for that, but then maybe that vocational synthesis period can be a time for that fostering and that mentorship,
Yeah, this area that we're talking about right now is really critical, because it's so easy to burn out, and if you don't have the tools, if you don't have the mentoring that can help you work out the tools to prevent yourself from burning out, or being naive in your ministry and dealing with lay people, because lay people can be very, very difficult and very manipulative.
So can priests, just so we're clear.
Yeah. No, that's very true too. Yeah, but and then you got another kink in the armor, which is people my age. I mean, I'm 75 now. I'm a boomer, and a whole lot of really weird ideas came out of my generation, and some of them got ordained. And so you get a generation of some priests who are really on a completely different page from like where John Paul II and Benedict the 16th were, and that's the problem. Real misunderstanding of what the council said and did, and that can be very problematic. I think you're seeing some of that actually resurface in the Francis pontificate, not necessarily the Holy Father himself, but I mean there's a sort of Dracula getting out of the grave in terms of the wrong ideas coming back, and it's not very helpful.
Yeah.
Anyway, look, I mean, the point is that I'm talking to two guys who really take the faith seriously, and it's exhilarating for me to see that there are plenty of good people like yourselves still around.
Well, Fran, I can tell you that Matt's wife, Renee, is going to be very happy that you said that in marriage, that means that he gets to do whatever she wants. She'll be very grateful to hear that.
I'm going to make sure she doesn't hear this ever.
There's a wonder. I saw this interview. It was at a Humanum conference in Rome, and my wife and I got such a kick out of it. There's this huge Nigerian Catholic family, beautiful people, 8 kids, and they ask the wife, well, who's the head of the family? And she says, well, my husband. And the husband says, yes, I mean, I'm the monarch, okay? But if you want anything done, talk to the prime minister, So it's just the way things work. I mean, in a healthy marriage, and this is another really important point. If I hope I haven't made it in this conversation previously, but a successful marriage is operating within a framework of love and a spirit of trust. But in its everyday life, it involves a load of candor. I mean, real candor. And that candor can get pretty blunt on important issues, Mm-hmm. And that's perfectly normal, because the church is exactly the same way. Lay people have an obligation to respect the office of pastor, the office of bishop, the office of pope. But that doesn't mean they automatically turn their brains off. I mean, they have to they have to be responsible for knowing what the faith teaches, for believing that, and then holding themselves and the people around them, including the ordained, faithful to that. And that's just the nature of a healthy family, which the church is, you know. So I think that Archbishop Chaput makes this point in his final interview at the very end of the book, that what's required in the future is real maturity on the part of both Catholic lay people and Catholic priests, because they have to be able to talk to each other candidly without alienating each other and embittering each other. And that's a difficult dance to have, but we absolutely need it now. Because, as you pointed out just a few minutes ago, Father, I mean, the priest can't do everything. He needs faithful lay people to be his assistants in managing the life of the parish and the church.
Yeah. Now, as a priest and someone who loves ecclesiology, I find that when I think about the things that will solve the problems of the church, I often go to priests and bishops working together, bishops working together with other bishops, priests working together with other priests, that sort of collaborative spirit and fraternal spirit and everything, and sort of a renewal then in the hierarchy. But every time I sit down and I really look at this, and it's alluded to a couple of times in some of the interviews, I really can't escape the idea that the great renewal for the church is going to come through the family, and will come through family life and faithful marriages. And I find that actually the places where I find that I'm most built up, it's when I spend time with good, faithful Catholic families. When I'm around those families, I see so much hope. I see so much zeal. I see so much energy, and just so much reason to trust that the future is going to be very bright.
Yeah, they're fewer, but they're stronger. That's just the nature of pressure. Yeah, the pressure makes diamonds,
Right.
or breaks them. You know, breaks the rocks. I mean, one other thing that I think that is useful in this conversation about the relationship of lay people and priests is that you know, when we moved with with Archbishop Chaput from Denver to Philadelphia, and the parish that we're in Yardley, which is a very nice community. I mean, a upper middle class community in the far north of the diocese. Parish was absolutely on life support. I mean, it was dying. And not because the pastor was a bad guy, he was really a good guy, but he'd been really beaten up. He was toward the end of his career. He'd really been beaten up because he had been chancellor during the worst years of the sex abuse crisis, you know, really took a beating from people. So that went on for 2 or 3 years. He passed away, and then we got a new pastor who was one of 6 kids in his early 50s. In a space of like 3 years, he completely turned the parish around. And how did he do it? Not through some kind of big dramatic program, but just by doing the little things that people gradually notice as signs of life. You know, calling people up at home, asking them how they were doing. You know, I mean, just the making the parish beautiful in little ways that weren't dramatic, but that you noticed. You know, clearly taking it seriously what he was doing, and bringing a new energy to the parish, so that when everything shut down during COVID, our donations went up because people believed in the future of the parish. That's the real power of a pastor. I mean, it's just in telling people that, hey, there's real life here and it really matters to be here. And if you're smart enough to do that in subtle as well as obvious ways, has a huge impact. You know, that's what being a good dad is to just tell people, hey, I'm here, I'm for you, I love you, and I'm going to do this, and I'd like you to help me. That's just really powerful.
So if that's the way the pastor reinvigorates the parish, what does the layperson do? What does the parishioner do?
You take responsibility and you step up and do stuff, you know?
Right.
I mean, a perfect example is the renewal of our adoration chapel. You know, we have a very active grief ministry and all that stuff, you know? I mean, raising money for local disasters that happen here. I mean, there's a huge flood here a couple of months ago. We raised $100,000 and just gave it to people who needed the money on an emergency basis.
Wow.
But at one time in our parish, we had 24/7 adoration, and then it just fell apart and is gradually being rebuilt. And by the way, that's a really important thing, I think, for people to be encouraged to do, because what does that accomplish? It accomplishes the restoration of an interior life in a culture that's totally externalized and constantly in conflict. There is no interior life in American culture anymore because we're all on internet. And it's destructive of, it's destructive of the whole experience of faith because there's no time for it.
Right.
So stuff like that, I mean, it really makes a huge difference.
It's amazing.
That I was curious what you were going to say. That has been my experience of, so we belong to a parish, my wife and I, and our 9-month-old son, but I think that it's a vibrant parish, and I think it's a growing parish, and the defining feature of the parish is that the men's group is healthy, and the young moms group. Like, we have so many crying babies at mass at 9:30. It's awesome, But like the young moms get together weekly with their kids, and the kids are playing together, and so the kids, as young as they are forming friends with other Catholic kids.
Yeah.
And so just that vibrancy, which is just like getting involved, and getting involved can look like, well, I'm a young mom and I'm just going to go hang out with another young mom. It doesn't have to be like, well, I'm going to go, fix that door that broke, although obviously that's needed too, but yeah, that corroborates my experience.
Yeah, we had the pastor that we had, it was, I guess, about 3 months ago. Every pew on a Sunday morning was filled. Actually, they're still there. Every pew was filled with an announcement to the parish that crying kids were welcome, and that we wanted young families to feel comfortable here. And that's been just another tool in the toolbox that the pastors had. I mean, and it's had a really positive effect, as you can imagine.
Right.
Yeah.
It's investment in the right kind of thing,
And Matt, I think we should give a shout out to your pastor, Father Suarez, because with his energy and the way that he goes about doing things, and like just the zeal that he has, you can't help but get excited. And then he's really good at letting you do stuff. So when people want to get started, he's like, let's go, let's do it. And by the way, I'm not going to run this for you. You've got to do it. So his energy, his zeal, I think he's brought such a gift and a life to your parish. It's awesome. I'm really proud of him for that. I think he does a great job.
Yeah. He's a great spiritual father. Yeah. Sincerely. I have benefited from his pastoring of me and my family. And so, yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah. I was just trying to not give away my location, Father. That's all.
All those people coming to find you at mass.
when you have a sense that, hey, this guy sees me, he's interested in me, it really makes an enormous difference, because and it doesn't take a lot of that. It just means that I'm not some cog in some sort of religious corporation. Father knows that I'm here, and that I have my own needs and concerns and things that I can bring to the table. That makes a huge difference. And look, I mean, when we were beginning this conversation, I don't know if I said it or not, because my brain gets addled. What I remember seems to fade away every day. But there's really I loved the church when I went to work for the church, and I love her more now. And I had a job where I dealt very, very intimately for 18 years with the abuse crisis. It was part of my job, and there literally was nothing that the Archbishop withheld from me. I mean, on the most sensitive priestly issues, the whole 9 yards, and at the end of it, it's been a fantastic life. It's just a really great experience, and I didn't earn it, have no idea why I got it, but the experience was one of just really great beauty. I'm very grateful for that. The priest, I've said this before, but the priests and the bishops that I've known and I've worked with, and I've worked with a lot of them, have been almost uniformly really good men. And lay people don't see that because they don't work with them on an intimate level. They don't see what the crises are. They don't see what the issues are or what the pressures on these guys are. You know, when you talk about priestly problems, the brain automatically, thanks to our mass media, goes to abuse, sexual misconduct. That's nonsense. These guys are guys. They don't get along with the guy that they're posted with, or they have some sort of other emotional problem, you know, and like just like us, for God's sakes, they're very much like us, except they're ordained and they have a different set of responsibilities.
Right.
But you know, it's just I'm grateful for the whole, you know, the whole ride.
Well, I'm grateful that you've put this book together because it has been so inspiring to read this, and I'm going to be going back to a lot of these interviews. But the book is True Confessions by Francis Maier. It's available on Ignatius Press. Fran, thank you so much for making the time for us today, and thanks for this contribution. This is incredible.
Thank you.
Matt, thanks so much. God bless you guys, huh?
You too. Thank you.
Thank you. Hey everybody, I hope you enjoyed the show. If you'd like to further support The Tangent, please consider subscribing or following on your preferred platform, following us at @thetangent_Catholic on Instagram, or even donating at veritascatholic.com. See you next time. God bless.